Hi guys! Next week another project. This one is taking a little bit more time. I've already mentioned it in the video before, and if you have been following me on Facebook and Instagram, you've probably seen some sneak peeks of it. And honestly, I wasn't quite prepared for how long it's going to take. I kinda expected it, but it was still quite a surprise. And for those of you who didn't see the title or the thumbnail yet, I'm making a big Gothic cathedral for my wartime table. As we all know, no Warhammer table is ready without a giant Gothic cathedral, so it's a must-have for me. And this time it's definitely not a tutorial, it's more of a documentation of what I'm building. So yeah, I'm Jagelsdorf and I hope you like the video. So, I rarely do start with a plan, but this time I made some drawings, so let's review them. This is how the cathedral is going to look like. I wanted to have 2 stories, each one about 10 centimeters high, and I want to have 2 towers, one of which is going to be ruined. Over here you can also see the holy symbols that I'm going to sculpt, mold and duplicate to put in various places on the chapel. Here's also the side view and a kind of isometric view of the chapel showing the gallery level, the marble checkered floor and a roof that's probably going to be made out of copper. This is quite an ambitious project for me. I have never done something like this, to be honest, but as we all know, hope is the last one to die, so let's give it a good old college try. As always, let's start with gathering our materials and some divine help. We're gonna need a few knives, some rulers, a pen or generally something to write. Of course, our little book with the plans inside it, scissors, although try not to use them too much, not to offend your knives. And I've also decided to ask Saint Hubertus for help, who is the saint patron of hunters. It has nothing to do with the cathedral, but I didn't have any other holy symbols at home. First I'm going to sketch the facade of the cathedral, and as I said before, I want it to have 2 stories, each 10 centimeters high, and then the top of the tower is going to be 5 centimeters high. So I measure, I draw all the things on my piece of MDF. And of course I screw up my measurements because I only use my ruler on Sundays. So after drawing a massive number of useless additional lines, I'm double checking everything and drawing some more lines that are supposed to help me with planning out the whole build, where the door is going to go, where is the middle of my cathedral. I'm also drawing out the roof, which is going to be about 45 degrees steep, and it starts about 5 centimeters off the second story, where the gallery is going to be. And then we can get to cutting. HDF is notoriously annoying to cut. Well, I don't know if it's notoriously annoying to cut because I don't know if many people are using it in their builds. But for how much I love to use it, I hate cutting it just as much. Thankfully, through movie magic, we can speed up the whole process a bit. Also, with enough force, it can go much smoother. And as long as you've made your first line straight, you can use the resulting groove as your guideline and you don't need a ruler after the first cut. So this is the basic shape of the facade. And then I'm going to draw some more lines just to make the whole thing even more confusing. But in all honesty, I'm just planning out where the windows are going to be, and I'm partitioning the facade into quarters. To make the doors and windows, I'm using a piece of paper, roughly in the size that I want them to be. I fold it in half and just freehand draw a shape that I like. Then I cut it out with a scissor and a knife to have a nice symmetric pattern that I can use for drawing my windows onto my facade and other elements. Using this method, all your windows should come out the same, but of course nobody is perfect and I am doubly so not perfect, So of course each and every window came out a little bit different. But hey, that's just the charm of my cathedral. It's unique, one of a kind. I've also decided to put my windows at about 2 centimeters high, which is roughly the width of my ruler, which makes things a lot easier. I cover my patterns in glue on one side so that they don't slide when I trace around them. I also wanted to cut out the pattern from something more durable like cardstock or cardboard, but it just led to compounding errors, so I stuck with the initial pattern, even though at the end of the project it looked quite rugged. And now the secret technique for making large round shapes: a jar lid taken from a jar of wonderful pickled beetroots. Everyone should have one at home. The second story is going to be somewhat smaller than the first one, which is 10 centimeters high for, the grandiose filling of the cathedral. The second story is going to be between 5 and 15 centimeters, so the windows are also going to be smaller. To achieve this, I simply folded my pattern in half. And then we can carefully cut out all the windows and doors. When you have a sharp knife, it bites into the HDF pretty nicely, so you can do this freehand with very little problem if you go slowly. After you have your first groove, you can speed up quite a bit, put more force into it, and after you have most of it cut through, you can just break the piece off and clean up the edges with the side of your knife. And yeah, I'm just going to continue, cut out all the windows, cut out the big round window. How is it called? Wait. How is it called in English? A rosette, I think. After the facade is done, I'm starting to take on the tower. I'm going to start with the higher one, and it just so happens that I had a scrap piece of HDF about 15 centimeters wide, so I just cut it to size and then scored it lengthwise so that I can easily fold it into 3 pieces. Folding it like this isn't perfect, it doesn't produce the cleanest structure, but I find it's a very efficient way of doing it. The effect is good enough and it can be easily improved upon if you decide you need something more exact. Next, we're going to take care of the gap between the tower and the facade, and it's going to be just a simple 5 centimeter wide panel with a single window. And I'm just doing all the measurements, cutting out the piece, cleaning up the edges, dry fitting it all together, and using my cutting mat for orientation as to where the window should be. And we're going to need 2 of these for each side of our facade. And in the meantime, I've also created the second tower, the ruined bell tower. And that's how our cathedral presents itself at the moment. Still very rough, but this is just the underlying structure that's going to give the building its strength. So with the facade and the towers ready, we can work on the ruined body of the cathedral. For that, I want to have 3 panels on the right side and 2 panels on the left side of the church. I'm just sketching it out on a scrap piece of MDF that just so happens to be of perfect size. And I'm going to use the jagged cut off from one side to form the ruined wall on the other side, just as efficient use of materials and to save myself some time cutting, as it is mighty annoying with this material. With all the pieces laid out, I try to do a cool swipe, but fail because of my fat sausage fingers. I wanted to give the walls a little bit more thickness, but I didn't want to cut more HDF, so I decided to double the walls with cardboard. I'm going to cover the whole thing in spackle anyway, later on, to give it some texture, so cardboard seemed like a cheap and effective way to give it some bulk, as the structure was already provided by the HDF. I wouldn't recommend making something like this entirely out of cardboard, as it would definitely soak through with all the water in the putty that I'm going to use, and it would definitely start warping and falling apart. And trust me, it happened to me on some of my models, so having a core of something more stable like HDF is definitely advisable. And I started cutting out all the windows, but I decided that it makes more sense to glue it on first and then cut it on top of it, as it would be much easier. And I'm cutting all the windows and doorways somewhat larger to give it some depth and create this nice portal effect just as you see it on older churches. Then it dawned upon me that I forgot about the main design element of a Gothic cathedral, the buttress, the flying buttress. So also very unlike me, I decided to do some research, looked at some pictures to help me decide upon a design. And I sketched out a rough 10 by 15 centimeter rectangle, or square, or no, rectangle, right? I think, yeah, rectangle, yeah, of course. And just freehanded a buttress. At first I wanted to make it a little bit more fancy, but then I thought about how annoying it's going to be to cut out, so I opted for a simpler design with the possibility of sculpting something more fancy on top of it after I've cut out the core structure out of HDF. And as with everything, I dry fit it before gluing it together with hot glue. Something like PVA or wood glue would probably hold better in some of these situations, but I'm definitely an impatient person and this whole build already took a lot of time, and if I had to wait for PVA glue to set on top of all the other things, I don't think I would ever finish it. So the left tower is supposed to be a ruined bell tower, but as of now I have simply cut out it straight like the other one. So in this step I'm making the top of it more jagged, so that later I have an easier job of showing how it's, ruined and collapsed and such. I'm also gluing it back together with hot glue because it has fallen apart in the meantime from all the manipulation. And I've also decided to reinforce the larger intact tower with some additional hot glue so that it also doesn't fall apart. So I've already thickened the facade with some cardboard, and now I'm going to do it with all the other elements, but only with one layer of cardboard and not two like in the front. I wanted to spice up the towers a bit. I wasn't sure how I want to do it, so there was some sketching and going back and forth as you see right now, but I've opted for cutting out 6 niches where I'm going to put some sculptures that I'm going to sculpt later. Initially I wanted them to be like windows, but it didn't quite fit with what I had in mind. I also reinforced the towers in the middle with some scrap pieces of cardboard so that they don't wobble as much. So here are all of the basic elements of our church. Only thing that's left is gluing them all together. First the sides to the facade, then the ruined tower and the shorter piece of ruined wall. I'm also reinforcing the connection with a bit of paper because it's all really wobbly at this point. Then the larger intact tower and the longer, less ruined wall. And again, lots of hot glue and some strips of paper to hold it all together. And yeah, at this point I'm thinking to myself, yeah, something may come out of this project. It may be alright. But as always with such projects, there will be some self-doubt, don't you worry. So in the meantime I was kind of annoyed and fed up with all the construction, so I decided to put some time into sculpting all the sculptures and effigies and all the small details that I'm going to put on the walls. As you see here, I've already sculpted a effigy of a knight before, and now I'm working on some sort of a holy man. Anyway, I'm using some polymer putty, and I'm no professional sculptor or anything to give you any advice. You basically make a clay rectangle for your body, then a little elongated ball for your face. I press in the eyes with a toothpick, cut in the mouth and some wrinkles with a knife, try to model the face and the nose a little bit. After that I'm using a flattened piece of polymer clay to form the hood. And at this point I should probably say that I'm not using any fancy clay, it's not Fimo or anything. It's cheap school grade polymer clay for like 1 or 2 euros for the whole bunch. So I don't expect anything great of it, and I also don't expect anything great from myself. With a toothpick I try to put some creases into his clothes, especially where the belt is going to be. Then I make a small collar to hide all my mistakes around the shoulders. And with the side of my spatula, I'm making a rope belt. And I'm also cutting the rope with the knife to give it a frayed look. For the arms, I'm using simple cylinders of clay. And then for his forearms, I'm making kind of an elongated triangle and then cutting in to form these long voluminous sleeves with the hands put in together, as he is supposed to be some sort of monk character. And at the end, I'm doing some finishing touches with the toothpick and the spatula to smooth something out. And here are some other things that I've sculpted in the meantime. The two-tailed comet I ended up not using because in the end I didn't like it and I'm going to redo it probably. So, this whole project has been done on a budget and our molds are also going to be such. I'm going to use silicone, but I'm going to use silicone caulking that I'm pouring into a bowl of very, very soapy water and then kneading for about 5 to 10 minutes. It has a very chemical smell, so you should probably do it in a well-ventilated room, but it works surprisingly well. Just be sure to smooth it out before you put your models in and not to press them in too deeply so that your silicone is thick enough and doesn't tear. In some places where I thought it might be a little bit too fragile, I've put some additional pieces of silicone. Now, depending on how much silicone caulking you use, it will probably take about 1 to 2 days until it cures well enough so that it can be handled safely. But it won't be fully cured probably for weeks. And for all this time, it's going to stink like a high school chemistry room, so better put it in a tight box and hide it. And as you see, the models come out nicely with some minor exceptions. But the mold is perfect, at least for our humble purposes. But as I said, the mold needs a long time to cure properly, so I'm going to set it aside for a few more days. I have also cast these guys in plaster in between various tasks, but sadly I didn't capture it on film, so here are some sneak peeks from the future and some photos. And start working on the cathedral itself again. In the meantime, I was trying to store the cathedral somewhere and it has sadly fallen apart. So I'm going to cut a piece of HDF as a floor and base for it, which I was going to do anyway, but it just so happens to be a perfect moment for it. And I simply glue it in with some hot glue. And it's also the perfect time to cover the holes in the towers, which previously I've left open on purpose, as I wasn't quite sure how I want to do them. I'm also using the time to plan out the floor plan of the cathedral. I want to have a roughly 1 centimeter wide border around the whole of it. I want to have a central walkway and then 2 naves, I think it's called, where I'm going to have my checkered and probably marble floor if I figure out how to paint marble by the time I have to paint this thing. And I'm just using some rulers to mark out the rough pattern that I want to have. And I have to get pretty creative with my angles at this point because of how tight it is. I also want to have some graves near the entrance to the church, which seemed to have been a common practice among the wealthy people in the Middle Ages and Renaissance period, which the Warhammer universe is roughly based on. And I'm also sketching out a few pews, some of which were probably going to be damaged in some way, some covered in rubble. I'm not quite sure yet how the inside is going to look like. And then the meat and potatoes of the project, covering the whole thing in spackle. And this is really an amalgamation of footage from many days, because on the one side it's a very time-consuming thing to do, and on the other side the spackle needs to dry for about a day before you can do something else around it. And sometimes just fiddling more with it just makes it fall apart. So I had to wait on multiple occasions for it to dry out so that I can continue on the next part. I don't want to spoil too much, but here are some sneak peeks from the future showing you how it looks before sanding the stucco down. So as you see, the cathedral is far from being ready. The actual project is a little bit further along than you've seen in this video. There were some sneak peeks of how it looks right now. I maybe put a little clip of how it looks right now, but it's far from ready anyway. I still need to decorate it quite a bit. I don't want it to be as flat. I need to sculpt it a little bit. Of course, the inside needs a lot of work, and of course still the paint job. I'm also not quite sure how I want to paint it, what sort of colors to use, so if you have any suggestions, definitely leave a comment down below. I'm also thinking of putting it on a larger base and also making the rear part of it, but it's all very much in the future. So anyway, if you like it, leave a like, subscribe so that you can see how the project continues. And yeah, I'll be seeing you next week on Tuesday. Bye!